A very good evening to you guys. Welcome to the Sake X Spaces. My name is Brighton Ngube. Today on the show, we're going to be looking at 10 years later, Itai Dzamara, 10 years without answers. Want to hear from different speakers this evening to understand in terms of this, what really happened. 10 years without answers, Itai Dzamara, and the history of enforced disappearances in Zimbabwe. My name is Brighton. As I said, please do share the link of this space on your timeline. Invite your friend to share on your WhatsApp platforms. Invite your friend to come and join us as we reflect 10 years later without answers, Itai Dzamara and the history of enforced disappearances in Zimbabwe. I want to hear from different speakers, and I've lined up speakers for you this evening. One of them is Kanyo Farisen. The speaker is going to be giving us and also the background and the history of enforced disappearances in Zimbabwe. We're going to be joined by also Justina Mukoko. We're going to be joined by Idris Ali Nassar, as well as Makomboro Hadizubishe, and also Kennedy Masie. They're going to be joining us this evening from now up to 6:30. We're going to be unpicking and understanding 10 years later without answers, Itai Dzamara and the history of enforced disappearance in Zimbabwe. I'll just give you guys the background before I open the platform for my guest there. I see you, Makomborero. Please do request the mic. I see you, Justina Mukoko there. Please do request the mic from your end as well, so that we can have this conversation this evening. I'm going to send you a request, Makomborero, to become a speaker. I'm going to send you again, Justina Mukoko there to become a speaker. And others guests that are joining us this evening, please do request the mic. This evening. It is, I see you there. Please, I've sent you the request to become a speaker. Please do accept it is from your end as well, to become a speaker this evening. So I'll just give you the background of this conversation for this evening. 10 years ago, that's 9th of March 2025, today marks 10 years since the enforced disappearance of Itai Dzamara, a journalist and a pro-democracy activist. Itai Dzamara was abducted on the 9th of March 2015 by 5 men while he was at a barber shop in Harare, Glen suburb. His abductors are said to have accused him of stealing cattle before handcuffing him, forcing him into a white truck and concealed number plates, and driving off. He has not been seen since then. Amnesty International believes he is a victim of enforced disappearance, a crime under international law. Prior to his abduction on 7 March 2015, Itai had addressed a rally in Harare where he called for mass action to address the deteriorating economic conditions of Zimbabwe, and for the late President Robert Mugabe to step down. He was previously targeted by state secret agents, beaten, abducted, and unlawfully detained. 10 years later, after the enforced disappearance of Itai Dzamara, the Zimbabwe authorities continue to impede the delivery of justice, truth, and reparations. The authorities' failure to launch an effective investigation into Dzamara's disappearance sends chilling message to activists that activists are seeking to demand justice, accountability from the government are no longer safe. So today's space is brought to you by Amnesty International Zimbabwe. They're bringing this space today in partnership with SIDE. We're going to be deliberate around this 10 years later without answers. Where is Itai Dzamara? The 10 years later without answers. So I'm going to be joined by Makomborera. I'm going to be joined by a number of guests this evening. Justina Mukoko, I see you there. Kennedy, I see you there as well. Idris, I see you as well. I've sent you the mic to become a speaker this evening. Please do accept the mic from your end as I give you guys context of what happened 10 years ago. Over the past decade, Amnesty International has reiterated that it's call for the government to set up an independent judge-led commission of inquiry into the circumstances surrounding Itai Dzamara's disappearance. With powers to subpoena witnesses, the organization has also called for the findings to be made public and those suspected of criminal responsibility to be brought to justice in fair trials. Itai's case is one of many Zimbabwe's long history of abductions and enforced disappearances that the authorities are yet to investigate, and if there is a sufficient admissible evidence, prosecute in fair trials. Zimbabwe's history is littered with human rights violations, including abductions and enforced disappearances, arbitrary detention, rights violations, including abductions and enforced disappearance there. So today on the show, I have lined up a guest to come and speak to us there around the issue of Itai Dzamara. 10 years later without answers. I've got Kanyo Farisa, the speaker there. I've got Justina Mukoko as well as a speaker. I've got Makomboro Hadizubishe as a speaker as well. I've got Idris Ali Nassar as a speaker, and also Kennedy Masie there as speakers this evening. Before I open the platform for my guests there, I see they've just joined me there. Let's go through the biographs of the guests that are joining us this evening there. I'm going to start with you, Kanya Ofarise. I see you are here as well. Kanya Ofarise is an Amnesty International Deputy Regional Director Research for East and Southern Africa. Kanya is an international human rights lawyer and a researcher with experience in private, public, and non-profit sectors in international law, human rights, and corporate law. She has worked in national, regional, and international organizations in South Africa, Italy, the Netherlands, Ethiopia, and the US States of America. She's passionate about development and the enjoyment of fundamental human rights by everyone, especially the most marginalized in Africa. And so I'm going to be joined by Justina Makoko this evening. Justina Makoko is a renowned and award-winning human rights champion and peace practitioner. She is the founder and president of the Justina Makoko Foundation, JMF, an organization inspired by what Justina experienced. The JMF aims to provide victims of human rights abuses and violations a platform to access healing and restoration. A victim of state-sponsored violence herself, Justina confirms her life was transformed by the ugliness of violence, but she triumphed for 16 years until August 2023. She was the National Director for Zimbabwe Peace Project, ZPP, which monitors and documents human rights violations and breaches of peace to advance sustainable peace in Zimbabwe. There is a lot to read there around Justina. She's our guest as well this evening. Moving on, Idris Ali Nasa is a senior researcher, Southern Africa for Human Rights Watch. Idris is a Fulbright scholar with over 17 years of experience working in media, advocacy campaigns, and communications in Malawi, Namibia, Ethiopia, and South Africa, as well as Zambia. He has worked to influence laws, policies, and practices that promote improved livelihoods for in-need communities, especially for the rural, poor women and children. And so joining us this evening is Makomborero Harare. Makomboro is a law and politics student at the University of Kent. He is a former Zimbabwe National Students Union ZNASO Secretary General from 2015 to 2017 and the Southern Africa Human Rights Defender of the year 2021. He currently sits in the UK Advisory Council there. That's Makomborero Haruzwivishe there. And then lastly, we have Kennedy Masia. Kennedy is an international human rights attorney. He has worked in the human rights field, developing communities for over a decade now. His dedication to ensuring the right to dignity, equality, and peace in Zimbabwe made him one of the leading human rights defenders for his generation. His creativity in tackling problems and finding solutions affecting marginalized communities earned him a recognition in Zimbabwe and abroad. He is an LLM from Notre Dame University, has won many awards, and in terms of recognition, extensive work in terms of human rights in Zimbabwe and of course in Africa. 2015, Kennedy was recognized as the Zimbabwean Human Rights Lawyer of the Year. Those are my guests for this evening. So please, guys, if you have questions, please write down your questions. I'm going to give you the mic this evening to ask your questions in terms of what you want to ask there on the issues, what is happening then. Discussing 10 years later, Itai Dzamara, 10 years later without answers. This is kindly brought to you by Amnesty International Zimbabwe in partnership with SIDE. And my name is Brighton Ngube. I'm going to be giving you this discussion this evening there. So I'm waiting for Kanyo Fariso to join us as well. Kanyo, I don't see your hand there. Kanyo, please do request the mic. Kanyo, if you're here, please do request the mic, and then we can start our discussion this evening. Before, maybe as I wait for Kanyo this evening, Idris as well, please do request the mic. Idris, I want to hear thoughts there this evening. Please do request the mic, Idris, as well. And then I'll start with this discussion. I see Makomborero is here as well. Let's just start with you, Makomborero. Maybe before I go to you, Makomborero, let's start with Justina Mkoko this evening. Justina, good evening to you, ma'am. Welcome to the discussion this evening. 10 years later, we don't have answers. 10 years later without Dzamara, 10 years without answers. Maybe my question to you, maybe, ma'am, is going to be around the issue of as a survivor, give us your personal testimony as a survivor. I'm going to give you about 15 minutes or so to talk to us about your testimony as a survivor of the abduction and torture in Zimbabwe. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. It's just said that we are sitting at 10 years without knowing what happened to Itai. And I think one can just imagine what his family is going through, because this was life-changing. His youngest daughter was 2 at the time when he disappeared. And his family has had to celebrate his birthdays without knowing what happened to him. And I think for me, these are people who came when Itai was having a haircut. And these people are Zimbabweans. And someone out there knows what happened to Itai. And I think they just owe it to the family, for the family to know what happened to their loved one. So it's so sad for us to be meeting in such an environment where we are commemorating a decade of not knowing what happened to a citizen of this country. I think many of you also know that I have had my own experience of being abducted. So I can actually confirm that this happens in this country. I was abducted on the 3rd of December, 2008. And it has been more than 16 years now. And what happens with that is, yes, you call me a survivor. I have lived 16 years after my abduction. But it's not a situation that is easy to live with. Trauma just sticks to you, whether you are a victim or you are a survivor. The sad bit is that it is arduous and it is painful. It's a lifelong journey that you have to travel. As an individual, you really need to commit yourself to be able to go through with trauma. Someone might say, but it has been 16 years. Yes, it has been 16 years, but it is days like this when we are talking about the abduction of Itai Dzamara. It brings back the memories that I have of December 3 and the days, the subsequent days after that. I was kept incommunicado for 21 days, where I think a lot of Zimbabweans actually thought that I had been killed, including my family. And I think what is sad is also the fact that it's not just the individual who is abducted who suffers in that situation. It's the entire family that suffers. Because at the time, my family was also getting calls from people. My brother was telling me that one day he got a call and someone was saying a body has been dumped at the gate. And there was no body at the gate. Obviously, everyone went out thinking that since weeks had gone by, probably that person was telling the truth. But all these are situations that also cause a lot of trauma for those around us as a family. So at times you get these panic attacks. I remember when I heard about Itai's abduction way back in 2015, I imagined where he was on that first day, and I could not stop kind of doing the same for myself for the 3rd of December when I was abducted. And the sad bit is that when you are abducted, you are not protected by the law. Whoever abducts you can do whatever they want. They can torture you. They can do anything. I was threatened with extinction. And always when there are other new cases of abduction or enforced disappearance, I go back in time. At times I actually land in the hands of the perpetrators. I remember one time I could bet my last dollar that, you know, what I was going through, it was like I could hear them breathe. The way that they were talking to me, the way that they tortured me, and all that is done so that you are dehumanized, you are degraded. But one thing that I know has worked for me in all this time, in terms of the journey of healing and being able to confidently look in the eyes of people who feel sorry for me. I can actually tell you that up to this day, there are people who still look at me and they feel sorry. The fact that I have had opportunities to tell my story, that has helped me a lot, because it's such a relief. It's like you are removing something from your shoulders when you are telling the story to someone. And in a situation where perpetrators are not made to account for their actions, it's the only outlet that survivors and victims of abductions have got. It's talking about what they went through and the experience that they went through. And in the 16 years, I can actually say I have survived, I have triumphed, and I have really started on a journey of being able to restore my dignity, because it's the intention of the perpetrators to belittle you. When they are torturing you, they are trying to remove all the dignity that you have got. And probably people were saying, this is the Justina who used to read the news on ZBC, and the director of the Zimbabwe Peace Project at the time. So they get a lot of excitement when they are doing that to people that they believe in their own mind they have got some kind of stature. So the idea is really to sort of bring down that. And I have spoken about telling my story. I have also written a book, The Abduction and Trial of Justina Mukoko, The Fight for Human Rights in Zimbabwe. I think when I wrote this book, I was so rejuvenated because I felt that I had told my story in my own words, and in the way that all this happened, and not to then have someone paraphrasing what they think actually happened to me. And I think I will repeat to say that telling your own story in your own words is liberating and is a good healing journey ingredient. And even after such a long time, after my ordeal, I still check in with someone to talk to, because at times you feel you are caving in and you just need to let out and have someone hold your hand as you are able to balance your life. And at times you actually recognize that your family no longer wants to walk that journey with you anymore. They want to disassociate from that pain. But because you were at the center of it, it's not possible for you to be able to disassociate. So for me, every time the 3rd of December, I go back in time and just see myself sitting in the room where I was severely tortured. On the first day, they beat the hell out of the soles of my feet. And at the end of that torture, I was not even sure I would be able to walk. At one time, I actually thought that the soles of my feet were just going to crack and ooze blood onto the walls. And this was also confirmed when a scan was done that indeed I had been tortured. And in another instance, I was also made to kneel on gravel. This guy came into the room with 2 mounds of gravel, and they were put there, and I was told to kneel. I thought it was an easy process for me to go through, only to recognize that the pain was excruciating to the extent that I was numbed, and I felt that I was kind of living. I left my body, and I was looking at this woman from some place, I don't know where, looking at this woman who was suffering. This is what the pain did. I won't even talk about the psychological torture, where you are stuck in a corner and you do not even know what is happening to your family. It's so painful. And then when you are released, you are then told that you wanted to overthrow the government, just for them to be able to detain you for longer. I have been classified as a Class D prisoner, and I had to move around with handcuffs and leg irons whenever I went to court. And I think for me, at times I sit down and just say to myself, how do the perpetrators feel if those who did whatever they did to me have not been called by their creator? How do they feel that they they tortured me both physically and psychologically for something that they know I was not guilty of? Because I'm convinced that it had nothing to do with overthrowing the government, but I believe it had everything to do with the work that I was involved in with the Zimbabwe Peace Project. And what I also want to say is and probably it will be easier for people to then interact as they ask questions, is that at the Justina Mukoko Foundation, we are a sanctuary for those affected by trauma to tell their stories, build a support system and network for the restoration of dignity, because that is important for someone to be able to claim their life back, because somehow you lose your life. And if you don't go through some of these processes in terms of dealing with trauma, you find yourself that you are not able to come out of this situation. And I also recognize that trauma is not an event that you can get into today and tomorrow you say, I am healed. Because even after 16 years, I can tell you that I am still not healed. I am on a journey of healing and also being able to claim my dignity back. But all this requires a lot in terms of commitment. But I think you're also aware that publicly Zimbabwe does not have facilities that allow victims and survivors of abductions to be able to deal with their situations. So you are faced with people who will not acknowledge that they have done something wrong, and at the end of the day, you're also dealing with trauma that will come in bouts, and you have to be able to balance your life going forward. So for now, I think I will stop here and entertain questions as we go along. But as I end, I also just want to emphasize to say someone knows what happened to Itai, and they owe it to the family and owe it to the citizens of this country. There was one time we were told that it was a barbaric act, but nothing has come out in terms of demonstrating that what happened to Itai was indeed barbaric. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Justina Mkoko, for that. Guys, for just joining us this evening, that was the voice of Justina Mkoko, a victim of state-sponsored violence. Yeah, she endured that. She's speaking about the issue of kneeling on the gravel, quite sad there, and also being beaten under her feet. Quite shocking there. But yeah, guys, for just joining us this evening, 10 years later, Itai Dzamara, 10 years without answers. This space is quite brought to you by Amnesty International Zimbabwe in partnership with SITE. My name is Brighton Ngube. So let me just move on to Fare. I see you, Kanyo Fare. So you have just joined us this evening there. Kanyo Faris is an Amnesty International Deputy Regional Director for Research for East and Southern Africa there. She's joining us this evening to also talk about Itai Dzamara, 10 years later without answers. What happened to Dzamara there? She's going to give us a background context in terms of the history of enforced disappearances, abductions, and torture in Zimbabwe. Good evening to you, Fari. Welcome to the space.
Thank you, Brighton. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, you are clear, ma'am. Please do go ahead. I'm going to give you maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes to speak about the history and the background of torture, abductions, and disappearances in Zimbabwe.
Yes, thank you. I don't think I'll be that long. I'll try to be really brief because I think we'd benefit a lot from hearing from people in the room today. Thanks so much for organizing this very important discussion and this very timely discussion. And I just want to appreciate you, Justina, for sharing what you've shared. And I think it really hits home and really shows the severity of this crime and this gross violation of human rights that is called enforced disappearance. I also want to acknowledge and to recognize all the victims and survivors of this crime in the context of Zimbabwe, because we know that there are many of them. Some are in Zimbabwe, some are not there. I want to recognize the victims, being the families and friends of those who have suffered this cruel human rights violation. So indeed, enforced disappearance, I want to first state, is a human rights violation, and it's been recognized as such by the international community. It's been recognized as this authoritarian tactic where authoritarian regimes directly attack human rights defenders with a view to silence them. It unfortunately also combines a lot of other violations. As we've heard from Justina and we'll hear from other speakers, it includes things like torture, arbitrary arrest, cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. And this can manifest in different ways for different people, but there are also particular vulnerabilities that women human rights defenders are especially prone to when they are at the hands of authorities. Including sexual violence and other abuses that are directed at women human rights defenders. So this is indeed, as I've said, a human rights violation, which really occurs when a person is deprived of their liberty with the involvement of state agents or others who have been authorized or supported by the state to deprive a person of their liberty. And usually it is followed, in fact, it is always followed by the state authorities denying that the person has been taken into custody or refusing to disclose where the person is. So what is important to understand about this crime is that enforced disappearance continues to be committed as long as the fate and whereabouts of the person are not disclosed. So in the context of Zimbabwe and in the context of Itai's case in particular, this crime continues to happen because 10 years later, the authorities have refused to disclose where Itai is. And that's why Amnesty holds that there is no statute of limitations when it comes to enforced disappearance, and there should be no statute of limitations that's applied in such a case because the crime is continuing. And again, I underscore that the victims of enforced disappearance include the family of those of the person who's been disappeared. And I think, as Justina has pointed out, and others have pointed out, that the ones who suffer so much are the families of these people. And so they deserve recourse and redress by the authorities. Now, in the context of Itai's case, this crime is continuing, especially because on the 13th of March 2015, the High Court in Zimbabwe ordered the authorities to take certain steps to show what happened to Itai. And authorities have failed to meet that court order, to comply with that court order. So this crime continues, as I've mentioned. And what is worrying is that President Mnangagwa in 2017 pledged to break away from the past. We, as Amnesty, have been documenting this crime and human rights violation of abduction and enforced disappearance as far back as the 1980s. And so this crime has been continuing as a tactic in this country. But unfortunately, and very concerning, is that this authoritarian tactic is not limited to Zimbabwe, and we're concerned about that. Very recent example is even in the case of Mozambique, where we've seen journalists who report on some of the post-election violence allegedly being forcefully disappeared. So it's very worrying that in Zimbabwe, this tactic of authoritarian suppression of expression and assembly has been continuing for so long, and unfortunately is also present in other parts of our region. So there are many unresolved cases, and there are many families living with trauma from these enforced disappearances that have happened. Justina has eloquently told her story of what happened to her some years ago. But we've also seen, for example, in August 2023, very recently, around the elections, where we saw that these were marred with violations and irregularities and systemic attacks by government of human rights defenders. As I mentioned, enforced disappearance is but one of the violations, but there are so many other tactics where people are arbitrarily detained, where they are abducted, where they are even tortured. And some even injected with unknown substances, which we don't know what the impact on their health and well-being is. We know the case of James Chidakwa, who also suffered at the hands of the government, including being injected with an unknown substance after being abducted. Similarly, with Womberaishe Ndende and Sanele Mkuhlane, Nelson Makwena, and others who have suffered this fate. We know people who have been dumped naked after being abducted by the government, like Takudzwa Ngadziore, and others who have suffered at the hand of the government. The case of Tapumane Masaya, whose body was found dumped in a farm in Mashonaland in the East Province. And there are various others whose cases we have documented, who have been abducted and tortured for days on end by authorities. And the government undertook to break away from this trend of directly attacking human rights defenders, but that has not happened. Amnesty has advocated and called for the government to set up an independent, judge-led commission of inquiry to comprehensively investigate the enforced disappearance of Itai. And that has not happened, which means that this crime continues to happen without redress in Zimbabwe. The government needs to conduct prompt, thorough, impartial, and independent investigations into all these abductions and these cases of torture, which we have documented. And that has not happened thus far. And so we are very worried that the government of Zimbabwe does not uphold its obligations in terms of human rights that is signed up to in terms of African regional human rights instruments, but also that the Constitution of Zimbabwe calls the government to uphold. That has not happened. So this is a very timely conversation, Brighton, and I hope that we can talk about how we can continue to call and amplify the calls for this investigation to happen, but also that Itai will not be forgotten. We will not stop calling for the government to investigate this crime. We will not call on other stakeholders, including the working group who are focused on enforced disappearance, to investigate this crime. We will not stop calling upon SADC to talk about this case of Itai. We will not stop calling upon the African Union, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the United Nations, and every stakeholder to make a noise about the disappearance of Itai, because this crime is ongoing in the context of Zimbabwe. Thank you, and back to you, Brighton.
Thanks so much, Fari, for that. Quite interesting what you are raising there, the issue of solidarity, and also taking measures to calling on SADC to intervene, and also to keep on asking questions. What happened to Itai Dzamara 10 years later without answers? Itai Dzamara. Today, on this day, we mark 10 years since the disappearance of Itai Dzamara. So, guys, if you're just joining us this evening, we have heard the voice of Fari there speaking about the issue of background, giving us the background and context of abductions and tortures happening in Zimbabwe. Yeah, quite interesting and sad hearing the testimony coming from also a victim of state-sponsored violence there. That's Justina Mokoko there. But in the meantime, please do request your mic. If you want to have questions to our guest this evening, please do request the mic. I'm going to give you the mic there and ask your questions. This space is proudly brought to you by Amnesty International Zimbabwe in partnership with Site this evening. My name is Brighton. Let's move on to another guest this evening that I have there. That's Makomboro Harizubisha there. And Idris, I see you on the space. Please do request the mic. Idris, I see you there. And please do accept from mic from your end. And then your guest there, also Idris. Let me just move on to Marco. Marco, let's look at the issue now to say issue of solidarity against enforced disappearances, abductions, and torture. What are your recommendations for government action? You're also a victim there as a master student. I know you have done many things in terms of activism, demonstration, and so on and so on. You're also a victim of torture, abduction, and so on. Speak to us, Marco, there in terms of solidarity against this. What can be done, Marco, in terms of solidarity? Over to you, Marco. I'm giving you 10 minutes to give us your solidarity message around the issue of disappearance and celebrate and mark. And remember, Itai Dzamara 10 years later without answers. Over to you, Marco.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, you are clear, sir. Please do go ahead to submission.
All right, thank you. And thanks to everyone who has joined this space. Solidarity against enforced disappearance is a matter that we need to be treated with urgency in Zimbabwe. Because when people hear of things to do with the abductions, they mostly associate them with political activism or anything, but they are happening in our societies. You see the end of state agents in even economic issues or economic disputes in our communities. You see the end of state agents in even social disputes in our communities. But of course, there are more prevalent in political issues. But this problem is issues that is everywhere. There is need for, I would rather say, solidarity in Zimbabwe against abductions and enforced disappearance, and it should transcend regional geographic boundaries. It should transcend even communities. It should transcend even gender and everything, as it demands collective action. The establishment of coalitions amongst ordinary citizens themselves, civil society, human rights organizations, and also regional, the international community. The networks should also reach there. It should, it should urgently be, escalated the level of solidarity to support calls for justice, closure, and also the victims of families, because families, they suffer the most. Like today, we remember Itai Dzamara. Imagine of his kids. I heard the previous speaker, Justina Mokoko, talking about his daughter. Imagine his kids, his wife. There was a day when his brother was also a victim of abductions, the late person. This other day, he would regularly visit his brother's family in Glen. So he came and picked me one of the days. And I blamed him for, coming to pick me that day, because I remember him as we were leaving. He was talking with his, with his my guru, with his brother's wife, and it was a very uncomfortable conversation for me. Even up today, I don't think I'll ever forgive him for bringing me to such a conversation. He was telling me that, look, with this time and everything, I don't think Mkoma Itai would return his brother. It's been years, and if you have any other thoughts about moving on and stuff, I think as a family would understand. And the response was, no, I'll wait for him no matter how long it takes. It was, and because of lack of closure, you can't outrightly declare that he will never return. What if he returns? And to try to force it on the family to say he would never return, what if their only hope to continue every day in life, their only hope is pinned on the hopes of his return? What if his kids, every day they go to school, when dad returns, maybe I'll show them my report cards from school from the time he was not around. So this is a very serious issue, which even if we were to go anywhere, like there's even a recent case where a non-political case of a lady environmentalist called Nadia Wongai Mavirakare, who is also suspected to have been abducted by state-related individuals. It's something that leaves trauma in society. So the issue of solidarity is urgent, and there are many efforts that have been done. We have to acknowledge by many people, civil society and everything, including forcing the government to account, because the most critical player in state-enforced disappearance and abductions in Zimbabwe, is the government. It's government, state agents. It's the police that should be safeguarding the citizens. It is military intelligence that should be, safeguarding our borders. But then they are threatening citizens within our borders. It should be the justice system which should uphold the constitution to serve and save, the lives of Zimbabweans that are being abducted. So the government bears the primary responsibility. And the worst thing is, during the day he was abducted, the president of Zimbabwe was the late Mr. Robert Mugabe. But on that particular day, the acting president was the incumbent president, Mr. Emerson Mnangagwa. Despite his promises for reforms, for human rights reforms and change in 2017 as he was assuming power, these basic marks of closure around enforced disappearances, he failed to tick the boxes. And I'm sure his failure to act on such things, to say, to bring closure, I think it screams of complicity. Not only complicity, it also screams of an intent to continue doing the same, because it shows that the government has officially adopted enforced disappearances, abductions, and torture, as we heard the gory details being described by Justina Mkoko. They have now adopted these things as tools of political transaction. It's a political current for them. If they want to negotiate something with the citizen, the government, when it is failed to persuade, it deploys the currency of torture, of enforced disappearances, to traumatize the community, to traumatize the nation. So I think the government, a lot of pressure. I know there are efforts that have been done, like even to try to sue the government. I and another victim of enforced disappearances, Tatinda Mberara, in 2020, we won a case when we sued the Minister of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs, Minister of Home Affairs, Minister of Defense, Minister of State National Security, and the Attorney General over their failure, to implement Section 210 of the Constitution, which provided that government should enact an act of Parliament to provide an effective and independent mechanism for receiving and investigating complaints for members of the public. This constitution was adopted in 2013, but the government took long because it does not see it as a priority. Why? What the lack of such a mechanism means, they will be doing, their agents will be doing things, unchecked. They will be doing things and they will not account. So I wonder if it was something that were affecting the government, like someone protesting, they would have clamped down. They would need a special instrument or act of constitution to deal with it. the police is already there. And I'm sure abduction and enforced disappearance, it's a crime under Zimbabwean law. If the government really had the will to clamp down on it, the police could deal with it very well. But then, despite this Section 210 of the Constitution, despite going to court, despite others going to court again and everything, it has not yet been set up. It's not yet fully functional. And I'm sure also they're trying to buy time so that they would say cases covered that happened from such and such a period going backwards can't be covered because it's been instituted right now. It's a way to evade accountability, and it's pretty much said for the government to try and evade accountability when there are clear trails of despair, trails of trauma, trails of fear, and this has been happening for decades. This has been happening for decades, and next, I think we also as Zimbabweans we need to have the agency. I think I'm trying to reflect more on what we need to do for solidarity with the work of Itai Dzamara. Itai Dzamara was a journalist, and his abduction was to try and shut down his voice, to try to deny him and threaten him into submission, not to speak out as a citizen, to threaten him his rights as a journalist to publish and everything. It was a claim down on media freedom, and also as an activist, human rights activist, they were trying to deny him his constitutionally guaranteed rights of freedom of expression and freedom of to petition and everything. So if we check all these rights, it means millions of us are affected. Millions of us love our freedom of expression. Millions of us need our freedom, to speak out. Millions of us need freedom to petition and protest. Millions of us deserve a free space, a free media space. Why? Because these are the reasons why the liberation struggle was fought for. And when I touch the liberation struggle, we have to check how the liberation struggle was not only confined to Zimbabwe, but it had regional networks, continental networks, international solidarity networks. Why? Because of the political aspect of the cause of the liberation struggle. It was mainly the struggle for land; those were economic rights, and two, it was about one man, one vote; those are political rights. So deploying enforced disappearances, it's a way by government to reverse the gains of the liberation struggle. It's a way by government also to reverse the gains of the subsequent struggles by the people of Zimbabwe, which resulted in the 2013 constitution, which also guarantees comprehensively these rights. So I think as Zimbabweans now, we need to understand that it were these rights which many fought for since colonial times, which many fought for since post-independence. It were now these freedoms that Itai was advocating for through his work as a journalist and also his actions as an activist. He was fighting for things which are not for his personal benefit. He was confronting and speaking out against corruption. He was confronting and speaking out against the rot of, our national institutions. I would rather use the word capture, which is also a corruption, political corruption. I think it's the most appropriate. He was also speaking out against, airing and, what every Zimbabwean was feeling. And he was doing it according to the law, according to the constitution of Zimbabwe. That is why they never at any point brought him before the court. They had abducted him and tortured him previously, but let him go numerous times. And because they knew that what he's doing, whatever he's doing, it's not something that is illegal, but it's something that is fully guaranteed by our laws. And they also knew that it's something that they also fought for, some of them in government during the liberation struggle. So as Zimbabweans, we need to understand how he, sacrificed, he paid the ultimate price for us all, not for his family, not for his children alone, but for all our children, for us all as the children of Zimbabwe. And we need to come up with also the same level of agency to speak out. If we are busy, there is nothing that can really stop us to do things like having abductions or enforced disappearance, a kind of online memorial presence, even a website that details all those things, where we, time and time again, we don't have to wait for a year to just count the years to say it's not 10 years, 11 years. We need to continue speaking out and pile pressure in terms of demanding a closure around these cases. They are many, and they also need to, they also need to, there are issues, and also a lack of closure and accountability need to be aired out, not just on today alone, but frequently and more deliberately throughout throughout the year, as a way to knock on the conscience of, number one, the government, number two, regional and international organizations and partners, and to create, as a way to create solidarity networks. I think it's important, and also to find ways to make all people participating in enforced disappearance account. I understand that it may be wide. There are state actors, there are non-state actors, there are private players, there are semi, the state actors. We know, like Zimbabwe, the case of Impala Car Rental, which has participated. Those are some of, soft targets, which, if pressed upon properly, if we deploy all our efforts, whether legal on international platforms or even through lobbying and other things, these are soft targets which we can pile pressure upon in pursuit of accountability, in pursuit also of pressuring the government. And to these issues of abductions, we need as a nation to find a solution to them, because it has also economic and other effects on Zimbabwe. And when I mean Zimbabwe, I'm referring to Zimbabwean citizens themselves. For example, Zimbabwe is clamoring to get back on the Commonwealth. It's Zimbabwe's youth who can't benefit from Commonwealth scholarships that other youths across the region or who are in the Commonwealth, in South Africa, Mozambique, Zambia, Botswana, they are benefiting from those, but Zimbabwean youths can't. It's Zimbabwean youths who can't benefit from opportunities, sporting opportunities, Commonwealth Games. There those things, and also scholarships that come through, those sporting opportunities, and etc. It's Zimbabwean youth and Zimbabwean ordinary citizens who are failing to get economic opportunities through, the trade networks, through even funding opportunities for startups, through programs that equip the modern day youth with modern skills. We are now going towards nanotechnology, AI. It now has more influence in our business, education, and even governance is done. But Zimbabwe is shut out. Why? Because the government simply doesn't want to solve the issue of abductions. It doesn't benefit neither the government nor us, and neither does it benefit anyone. So I think it's the most unpatriotic thing by the government, and something that we need to speak out more again. Is something that we need to come up with mechanisms to say enough is enough. Because on a daily basis, each and every generation in Zimbabwe, it has had victims of enforced disappearances. Because now, when you are to speak of people that were mentioned by the previous speaker, Faris, the likes of Nelson Mkwena, Wombirai Shenente, the Takudzo Ngadzore, if you hear about it, it's like it's the first instance it's happening. But then there are others who were abducted back then, 2008, the likes of Chesnam Koko, who went through the same ordeal they went through. It's still happening now. What's going wrong with our country? Other countries are having race to go into the space. Other countries are having races with, deploying and developing AI models, Grok, DeepSeek. You find OpenAI. But where is Zimbabwe? Zimbabwe is busy maintaining an infrastructure of abductions, where if we are to take Justina Mukoko and Takudzo Ngadzore, if they are to sit, they can speak with one language because they have similar experiences. These experiences are neither developmental nor economic nor academic, but it's about form of abduction. It's about what happened. It's about, they'll be exchanging notes on the pain, how a button stick feels on, an open sheet, and on how a shambok feels on your naked back, on how it feels to be just left maybe in a dark room. You don't know what will happen to you. You don't know whether you live or not. You are thrown into prison. It's not a good Zimbabwean story, and I think we need to develop the agency to say what has happened before should never happen to another again. That was the spirit of agency that Itai Dzamara had, and we need to do that. We need to also have just networks like the space here. Thanks to Amnesty International for coordinating with people from across the region. We need to consolidate more and more and more. When I went to Human Rights Center at York University, I saw Jesnam Koko's book there, and in a kind of memorials memorial that honors human rights defenders across the world. These are things which we also need to do here locally to ensure that their memories live forever and ever, not to remind us of our painful past, but to remind us of what never to tolerate, to remind us of what should never be done. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much, Makomborero, for that. Quite interesting and said what we're raising there, the issue of solidarity, what needs to be done there to amplify the voice of forced disappearances, the torture and abductions in Zimbabwe. You guys just joining us this evening, we're talking about Itai Dzamara 10 years later without answers. I'll just go through this brief intro to give you guys also context for those just joining us this evening. 9 March today marks 10 years since the enforced disappearances of Itai Dzamara, a journalist and a pro-democracy activist. Itai Dzamara was abducted on 9 March 2015 by 5 men while he was at a barber shop in Harare Glen suburb. His abductors are said to have accused him of stealing cattle before handcuffing him, forcing him into a white truck without number plates and driving off. He has not been seen since then. Amnesty International believes he's a victim of enforced disappearances, a crime under international law there. Prior to his abduction, on 7 March 2015, Itai had addressed a rally in Harare calling for President Robert Mugabe to step down there. He was previously targeted by state security agents, beaten, abducted, and unlawfully detained there. That's what we're talking about this evening there. 10 years later without answers, Itai Dzamara and the history of enforced disappearances in Zimbabwe there. This is brought to you by Amnesty International in partnership with Site ZW. My name is Brighton Ngube. And Justina Makoko this evening, Makomborero Zubishe, Fari there, as well as Idris, and also Kenneth Masie there. And also moving to another guest this evening, I see Idris has just joined us there. Idris is a Human Rights Watch there. We're going to looking at the issue of a regional review of forced disappearances there in terms of what's been happening in terms of the region and so on. I'll just give you a brief background of Idris this evening. Idris is a senior researcher, Southern Africa for Human Rights Watch. Idris is a Fulbright scholar with over 17 years of experience working in media, advocacy campaigns, communications in Malawi, Namibia, Ethiopia, South Africa, and Zambia. He has worked to influence laws, policies, and practices that promise improved livelihoods for in-need communities, especially for the rural, poor, women, and children there. Good evening to you, Idris. Welcome to the space.
Thank you very much, Brighton. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Hard act to follow, Marco, but thank you for sharing your story, Marco. Thank you very much, Justina, and also, thank you to Amnesty for this space. So I'll be very brief, really, because on the African continent, the practice of this enforced disappearances is rather widespread, unfortunately. And it's used primarily as a tool of repression and suppression. However, we don't have a lot of data on that can accurately reflect the magnitude of the problem, as many cases are not reported or they're not officially, registered. I think that was in 2021. Yes, in 2021, the UN Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances noted that there were about 46,000 cases that were under consideration, and about 4,700 or so related to African countries. And, there's a lack of awareness about this crime of enforced disappearances, or rather also an inability to challenge the laws of particular countries. And there's also a lack of political will, and also victims of those people who've been disappeared fear reprisals from the government. So that's why in Africa, I think the data on enforced disappearances is not as systematized, and also, the crime doesn't seem as prevalent, but it is quite prevalent. That said, even a single instance of enforced disappearance is a huge crime under international law. And Kanyo did give us the definitions of what it means, under international law, how is enforced disappearances defined. So enforced disappearances really violate a range of fundamental human rights, laws, and fundamental human rights that are protected under the ICCPR. And Zimbabwe is a part to the ICCPR. And some of these rights include, detention, torture, cruel and degrading treatment that Justina has so eloquently talked about. And then in the region, because we have so many regimes that are brutally clamping down on protests and dissent, we have, unfortunately, a number of cases that would mirror what we're talking about here, about Itai Dzamara's case. In Mozambique, in Angola, in Eswatini, we have authorities who have failed to investigate serious human rights violations committed by government security forces, such as these enforced disappearances, extrajudicial killings. And this, unfortunately, has the effect of emboldening the perpetrators and disempowering the victim. A few examples. In Mozambique, the leading human rights organization there, called Liga dos Humanos, LDH, reported that the government security forces had abducted and summarily executed or disappeared about 83 people in the provinces of Manica, Sofala, Tete, and Zambezi between November 2015 and December 2016. And in cases that we have investigated as Human Rights Watch, family members of these disappeared people say that government officials had failed to provide them with any information about the whereabouts of their relatives. And this was despite strong evidence of government officials being seen taking these people. And then this falls under the classical definition of international law definition of enforced disappearances, where state officials or their agents act in broad daylight. They do these abductions sometimes with eyewitnesses, yet turn around and refuse to acknowledge the deprivation of liberty of the people that they've taken, or even reveal the whereabouts of the missing persons. And Mozambique, we've seen the continuation of that in the post-election disturbances, where a number of people have been reported missing, and also in cases where Human Rights Watch has been working very closely in the Cabo Delgado region, where there have been reported cases of arbitrary detentions, torture, and other cases of enforced disappearances. And then we can move to Angola, another bad boy in the neighborhood, unfortunately, where in the past few years, Angolan state security forces have been implicated in serious human rights violations, including more than a dozen extrajudicial executions and other unlawful killings. For example, in 2023, men who identified themselves as coming from these criminal investigation services took into custody a group of young boys, some of whom were later found, some of whom have not been found. Those that were found were found with their bodies were found at a morgue with bullet wounds and showing signs of severe torture and degradation. And some of you may be familiar with the cases of Antonio Kamuligo and Isaias Kasule, who were separately abducted by unidentified assailants after they organized a protest in May 2012. This was a protest by former presidential guards and war veterans over, complaints of unpaid salaries and pensions. These two went missing in May 2012, and by November 2023, they had not yet been found. And a confidential memo, which Human Rights Watch looked at and believed it was authentic, described the role of the police and the domestic intelligence services in the abductions, in the torture and the killings of these two. To this day, justice has not been served. So just as in Zimbabwe, across the region as well, in some countries in the region, we have cases of inept, either belated, grossly inadequate, or altogether absent investigations into cases of enforced disappearances, which then exacerbates the suffering of the families, as Kanyo had said, because this is a continuous crime, to whom not knowing what happened to their loved ones is a source of perpetual anguish. So as countries, as we have in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, in Angola, in Eswatini as well, cases of severe human rights violations, what is unfortunate about this is that the regional bloc, the Southern African Development Community, SADC, can best be described as burying its head in the sand. It's quite unfortunate because while we acknowledge, and Marco has said this, that the primary responsibility of stopping abductions lies with the state, but to eradicate this crime of enforced disappearances from the continent, from the region, it is necessary to have a collaboration and efforts at regional level to stop this crime. For example, right, as we all know, SADC leaders met in Harare last August and completely ignored Zimbabwe's human rights situation. At that point, when they were meeting in Zimbabwe, over 160 activists, elected officials, opposition members, and others were in detention simply for exercising their political rights. So what could SADC do in this case, the case of enforced disappearances? We say, SADC leaders should or could publicly assert themselves and press the Zimbabwean government, as well as the Mozambican government, as well as Angolan government, to respect its obligations to protect all citizens, right? They should push for Zimbabwe to ensure justice for past abuses, is respected, and also to undertake reforms, including, the amendment or repealing of all legislation and the full implementation of the Constitution, all legislation that infringes on human rights, and also the full implementation of the Constitution. SADC countries could do well. I mean, SADC itself, the regional body, could do well to call for a full investigation into Itai Dzamara's, enforced disappearance. At the continental level, we have the guidelines on the protection of all persons from enforced disappearances in Africa, which are adopted, I think, by the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in May 2022. So in recent years, some countries have taken important steps to combat enforced disappearances, including by ratifying the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances, and also the RAM statutes. Some have adopted the Malabo Protocol. Some have criminalized enforced disappearances. Some have adopted other legal and policy reforms to prevent this crime from happening. Unfortunately, Zimbabwe has not moved in that direction. I mean, we are here talking of 10 years since Itai disappeared. And I think voices demanding that Zimbabwe should set up an independent national commission to investigate, Itai's abduction should not die down. Those voices should still, continue being heard. There should be a commission established. The commission's findings should be made public, really. And I recall, after Itai, a few months after Itai was disappeared, George Charamba, the then spokesperson of President Robert Mugabe, dismissed calls for the president to be seized with Itai's disappearance, right? I think he said it was a political matter and it was not a matter worthy the attention of the president. But I think the authorities in Zimbabwe right now should show the world, should show the Zimbabwean people that the disappearance of a prominent human rights advocate, of a prominent journalist, is a matter eminently worthy the attention of the nation, the attention of the president, the attention of law enforcement, and they should do justice by investigating the disappearance of Itai Dzamara. I think I could stop here to allow for time for others to come in with comments and questions.
Well, thanks so much, Idris, for that. Quite interesting what you're raising there, the issue of what has been happening. They review the regional background in terms of tortures, abductions that have been happening across the region. They, in particular, focusing more on Itai Dzamara. 10 years later, without answers. We continue to ask for answers, as Makomboro said there. We continue to ask for solidarity, for people to speak and ask questions. What really happened to Itai Dzamara? The 10 years without answers. And you heard earlier on where Chestam Koko, the victim of torture, abductions, who was speaking there to say she was in a room there and they came with buckets of gravel there and they made a nail on top of the gravel there. Imagine the pain she went through and beating her under her feet there, the pain she went through, the trauma that she went through there under that torture there. Yeah, guys, for just joining us this evening, looking at 10 years later, 10 years without answers, Itai Dzamara there. And my guest for this evening is Justina Mkoko there, Makomboro Razuvishe, Idris, as well as Fari. I see you now, Kenneth, you have just joined us there. Kenneth Masie there. One of our speakers for this evening is going to be looking at also the issues of abductions, torture, and what's been happening there in Zimbabwe. There, Ken is going to be looking at the issue of a lawyer's quest for truth, lessons from the Itai Dzamara's case. Let me just give you a brief bio there of Kenny there before I give him the mic to speak this evening. Kenny Masie is an international human rights attorney. He is worked in the human rights field, developing communities for over a decade now. His dedication to ensuring the right to dignity, equality, and peace in Zimbabwe made him one of the leading human rights defenders of his generation. His creativity in tackling problems and finding solutions affecting marginalized communities and recognition in Zimbabwe and abroad. He's going to be speaking us there about the issue of the quest of a lawyer there. I see you guys just joining us there. I see you, Leonard. I see you, as well as Dr. Keith Silik. I'm going to give you the mic later on to open the platform for you guys to ask questions, to be asking our guests the questions there after Kenny has spoken there. Good evening to you, Kenny. Welcome to the space.
No, thank you very much for inviting me to the space. Yes, just to be clear, can you hear me?
Yes, you are clear, sir. Please do go ahead to submissions.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so well, I have been involved in Itai Dzamara's case since the beginning. I was one of the first lawyers to be called when he was abducted. I can safely say that I assisted Itai Dzamara in making all the reports that were needed to inform the authorities of his abduction. And since then, I've been involved in the step-by-step processes that have happened. And there has been quite interesting information that, that has come out. And of course, probably the public does not know because the authorities probably evade or do not want to make that known. But I think the first part of my presentation, I'll just probably talk about my experience during the time when Itai was abducted. And probably before that, my history with Itai dated back before his abduction. At one point in 2014, Itai was attacked and left for dead. And I was the lawyer who went to assist him pretty much with the legal, stuff. But I also became a victim of what happened to my client. I was tortured as well by the police. They broke my arm, and from that day, my relationship with Itai was cemented in that in that struggle where both of us were attacked by the system. I was trying to defend him as a human rights activist, and he was attacked for doing his work as a human rights defender. So from that day onwards, we just became more than a client legal practitioner. There was more than a client legal practitioner relationship. It became family, so to say. So when he was abducted, I was pretty much vested and very much interested in the outcome and finding out what happened to him. So in several days into his abduction, after reporting, the police refused to clearly investigate, citing that in fact, the first police station that we went, these police officers were clearly afraid. That's what I can say. They did not want to have anything with this case. So we went to Harare Central Police Station where we made another report, and they clearly told us that they were not going to investigate because it was too early for us to make the report. But to us, it was not a case of a missing person. It was a case of a crime that had been committed, that Itai had been kidnapped by people that had been seen by two gentlemen who were at the barber where he was abducted. So we then, became innovative with the law, and through Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, a habeas corpus application petition was actually filed with the High Court before Justice Mangota. So this is the first habeas corpus under the current constitution in Zimbabwe, and an order was granted where the police were supposed to investigate the disappearance of Itai. They were supposed to give fortnightly reports of their investigations. They were also supposed to put in, media notifications so that the public in general would be involved in the investigations and so forth. So ZTV was supposed to be approached, the news radios and all that stuff. But honestly, I did not really see that coming. So basically, there was a breach of that order on the inception. In as much as their reports say that they did that, I personally did not see anything on ZTV or even on the national radios and all that stuff. If they did it, probably they did it in the middle of the night when no one was listening. But after that, information started to trickle in, and through Patson, a message was sent to Patson through a text message. And this was like several months into the abduction. So this was pretty much, this was like in September of 2015, 16 September to be specific, several months after his abduction. And this was the closest we could get to a proper lead to what happened to Itai. So the message was pretty much specific. And I'll read it verbatim because I do have the documents in front of me right now. The message said that Itai was abducted using a white double cab registration number ABG 286 by Tichareva Mbaiwa, Libad Shamu, Owen Zewanai Mazarura, Tendai Chinyani, and taken to Border Gezi for 4 days, and then moved to Goromonzi Farm by Watson Marufu from the Army KG-6. Meeting between police and CIO, they were accusing each other and said to have killed and buried Itai at Chikurubi Prison Cemetery, grave number 71. Exhumed, taken to them in Chitamba Farm, Mazowe Road, after Glenara Estate Farm, past toll gate near CIO headquarters built, and Daikoko now call the police there, Musare Gere. This was the message that came in, and to us, after several months of waiting for information and also going through some of the information that we had, this was the closest lead that we had. So, if we say like when we talk about the police not being serious or even the government not being serious, you can actually see from the what they call the team that was investigating this case. This team was led by a assistant inspector, I think he's retired now, officer commanding CID Law and Order Division, Makedenge. Makedenge is a well-known human rights abuser all over Zimbabwe, and he has been cited in many reports of kidnapping human rights activists and all that stuff. So this was the person leading this investigating team. And to me, I wouldn't have been wrong to suspect that Makedenge was even actually involved in the abduction of Itai. Of course, without no evidence, just given his history of abusing authority and being cited in several human rights reports as being one of the perpetrators of such heinous crimes. but he was the one who was leading this investigation. So we followed up this information. The first port of call was getting to know who actually sent that number. That's that message. So they began, a trail of it was just confusing. But the number, the person who sent the text was identified. And that person was identified as a certain young lady who was in Kwekwe, Redcliffe. So the police asked us as lawyers to accompany them to Kwekwe to go and interview that person. So we went to Kwekwe and we saw that this young girl was just an O-level student who had no sophistication whatsoever, or who could not have been involved in this abduction. But later on, we found out that that number had been allocated to someone else before that girl. So that person was found out, and he lived, I think he was in Sunningdale. So the police went to Sunningdale to the address that was on that line, and they discovered that this person who had been allocated that line had died in 2010. This is like 5 years after, 5 years before Itai Dzamara was abducted. So we're like, so what's going on here? Then we were like, okay, here's the thing. If it's the issue of the line, why don't you find out the serial number of the phone that used the line? Then the police actually did their investigations. I don't know how they were getting that information, but they found out the phone that actually activated that line and the serial number, and they found out the person who owned that phone, and that person was actually found. And that person, when they went to him, this person sells SIM cards, and they said that this person sells SIM cards in bulk, and probably that SIM card was activated by the person, but they don't know who the eventual owner of that line was. But then the investigations then just stopped there, because it was like we're just being sent in a direction that probably the police officers knew what they were doing and just sending us in a different direction. Then looking into the message again, grave number 71, we went to Chikurubi, where Itai was said to have been buried. We went there, and when we got to Chikurubi, someone actually lit fire at the gravesite where we were supposed to go. So we went to the gravesite. We could not tell which grave had been tempered and which had not been tempered. And to me, I told them this was a clear issue of people not like tampering with whatever we were doing. Then the next thing, the car, the number of the car, the AGB, that car was identified. A certain person who was once a ZANU-PF youth in Mbare was identified as being the owner of that registration, the car registration. But the car that he came with to the police was it was the Mitsubishi Kent. I don't know, but it was not a hard body. So the police were like, this is a different car, so we're not going to pursue this lead. We went to Chikurubi, we went to Goromonzi. Actually, we went to Goromonzi, and we went to Mount Darwin. And when we got to Mount Darwin, where they said Itai had been taken, it was a border Gezi base, but apparently that base was a military base. So when we got there, we were literally surrounded. It was myself and some 5 police officers were part of that team, and there were 2 people from the Central Intelligence Office. We were actually surrounded by the military guys. They were like 10, and guns they were actually pointed at us, and they were like, "What are you doing here? Who gave you the authority to come here?" And all that stuff. But they talked to each other, and apparently they agreed that if the police wanted to investigate anything at that particular base, they had to have authority from the minister. So we just left it like that. Then comes the names of the people who were listed there. To us, it seems like it was an obvious thing that if you take these names to the registrar, they'll pretty much confirm whether those people were alive or were actually in the registry, or if there was any person who had those names. But what they told us, like, it was surprising. Like what they told us, they said, yeah, we went to the registrar At that time, it was Mudede. And he said that he could not act on these names because he wanted us, as the victims, to come and tell him the birthdays, like the date of birth of those people. How would we know the date of birth of those people? We just wanted the confirmation of whether those people are in the registry or not. So they then said, we're not going to investigate any further. So when we talk about the seriousness and the sincerity of the authorities when it comes to the issue of Itai Dzamara, you could say, you could probably say that the police somehow, somewhere, they were involved in this abduction. Because there's no reason, as what my sister Justina said, there's no reason why a whole government cannot account for a single individual, Itai, because these people who abducted Itai are clearly Zimbabweans, and they are witnesses, and there's actually information that came through Patson, and it was verified by the police, and so forth. This information that I'm talking about, it is there at the High Court. The case number is HC221/15. It's there at the High Court. This is like public information. Any journalist or anyone can just get in the High Court record and find all this information that the police have been putting in the file. But I think clearly most people probably don't know about this. But what I had been told to come and talk about is probably that experience that I had, and also probably to relate that to the Missing Persons Act in Zimbabwe. So the Missing Persons Act in Zimbabwe provides a legal framework for addressing cases of missing persons. And I would think that there are some implications, that can be, put together when it comes to, to Itai Dzamara's case. But I'll just focus on just key sections of this Missing Persons Act. So Section 3 of the Missing Persons Act provides for the reporting of missing persons. And this section outlines the procedure of reporting a missing person. And it requires that a report be made to the police, who are then obligated to initiate an investigation. We did that. And initially, the police had refused to take that report, which they then acted upon being persuaded by a High Court judgment by Justice Mangota. But to date, I can safely tell you that the report that I have right now at hand, and I can surely say that this is the report the last report that you find in the order, which was submitted in 2017. So from 2017, there's no record of any other subsequent reporting the investigations that they've done since 2017 to date. I might be wrong, because but I'm clearly certain that the last report that is official was submitted by the police in 2017. And one thing I'll tell you is that some of these reports, we would follow them up. Like, guys, where are the reports? Because it would seem as if the police were sneaking into the High Court and just submitting the reports, probably maybe out of time or not. But would then follow up we don't have any reports. We don't have any reports. Then they'll say, no, we submitted it at the High Court. Probably they would have submitted it that day or not. But there's that lack of trust with the law enforcement when it comes to Itai's case. So Dzamara's disappearance, prompted us to report, and we wanted the investigations to be done, of which clearly to us these investigations have not been far from satisfactory, and it's actually sad. So going to another section, Section 4 of the Missing Persons Act also provides for the duties of the police. And this section mandates, the police to take all necessary steps to locate the missing person, including conducting searches, gathering evidence, collaborating with other authorities. In this case, the police have clearly not done enough when it comes to investigation. If you look at, if anyone is interested, probably looking at those reports, if you look at those reports, it would seem as if the police were not really investigating the case, but they were waiting for the relatives, Itai's family, to come to the police with information. So there was not even any active investigations that were actually properly done by the police led by Makedenge. The only thing that you find in there is like we went to the morgue, we went to the psychiatric units, then we did not find Itai. There was no real tangible investigations that they were following any leads that probably they had besides what they, what they said, what they were waiting for the relatives to come with the information. Then I'm just going to wind up. I know time is about to, it's not on my side. But there's Section 6, which also includes the role of the Registrar General. So this section requires the Registrar General to maintain a register of missing persons and to assist in investigations where necessary. Well, in our case, the Registrar General is one of the persons who actually impeded the investigations. The names of the people who are on record as having, who we have on record as having abducted Itai Dzamara, the Registrar General refused to actually give us further information, beyond what we had provided. He said that we're supposed to bring, give him like date of birth, and also I think the other thing was like he wanted us to provide him with their ID numbers. But clearly that showed the insincerity of the Registrar General, that they did not even want anything to do with Itai's case. Then lastly, the Missing Persons Act also provides for the declaration of death. So this section, that's Section 7. This section allows for a missing person to be declared dead after a specified period if they remain untraceable. But there has to be proper investigations that would have done to actually make that conclusion. As of now, we don't even know what happened to Itai. We don't even know whether he has been killed, he was killed. We don't even know whether he's still alive and is somewhere. But the fact is, the law enforcers, the authorities, should actually make investigations to such a point that even the relatives and us can be convinced that, well, no, these investigations actually lead to one conclusion, that Itai is deceased. Then this act can then come into play. But as it is now, the authorities are far from doing that job in terms of the act, and we are just left with just speculation and information that we have that we cannot act upon, because the people who are actually impeding the full investigations and looking into this information, which to me is something that is tangible and can be acted upon effectively, so that the relatives and us lawyers can be convinced that at least we have exhausted that avenue and these people have been cleared, or these people do not exist and so forth, and the government is not involved. But that is not it. The government has just clearly refused, neglected, and just left this case to be just an open check, and this is harming Itai's family, harming his children, is what my sister Justina said, that the family is going through so much and they need closure. And I think that is what I can say in regards to this case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenneth Masia, for that quite interesting facts that you are releasing there in terms of as a lawyer, as an attorney working on that case there, what you have experienced on that case there. Quite shocking and sad, the revelations coming from Kenneth there. Guys, for just joining us this evening, we're looking at Itai Dzamara, 10 years without answers. Looking at that case there, the abductions, the tortures, what really happened to Itai Dzamara there. And my guest for this evening is Makomborero Harizubishe. He's a politics student, a law and politics student at the University of Kent, and also I'm joined joined by Idris Ali Nasser. He's a senior researcher, Southern Africa for Human Rights Watch. I'm also joined by Justina Mukoko. She's a renowned award-winning human rights champion and a peace practitioner and a founder for Zimbabwe Peace Project there and Justina Mukoko Foundation there. And also I'm joined by Kanyo Farise. She's the Amnesty International Deputy Regional Director, Research for East and Southern Africa. I'm going to open the platform for you guys this evening to ask questions. I see you've just been joined by two speakers. My time is really running away from me right now. I'm going to ask you guys, if I want to ask you questions, please be brief, to the point, and ask your question to our speakers there. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Keith Selika. Good evening to you, sir. Welcome to the space.
Good evening to you. I don't know if I was my sound.
Yes, you are clear, sir. Please do go ahead with the question this evening.
No, I didn't have a question. I thought I'd make a small commentary around the investigation of the case. So some of the things have been alluded to by the previous speaker. I just want to concentrate on the investigation process. My background is I used to work for the police. To those who are not aware, I used to work for the police down here in the UK. I became interested in the case when it came into fore in March. And I remember that time I was doing my PhD and I spoke to Patson. So some of the things that Kennedy has alluded to, I'm aware of, because I came in touch with Patson. Anyway, I want to comment briefly on the investigation, because that's where I have experience around. So I agree with Kennedy. There was what we call a pseudo investigation in terms of the standards of investigation is quite poor in terms of public information. As you all know, we had the vehicle description and we had the description of suspects. That was not circulated at all. And again, as Kennedy mentioned, unless they did it at midnight, we were not aware of that. Again, witness testimony was ignored. It was a barber shop in Harare. I know those particular locations. So all that witness testimony was ignored. I don't know where it was actually captured. There was no forensic investigation as well in terms of the barber shop itself. The scene of a crime scene that could have yielded so much forensic information, car tires, objects dropped. And one of my interesting one was cell site information. If there was that restriction in terms of the ability of individual on the scene, cell site information in Glen, in that particular location next to that barbershop could have told us that those 5 people entered the barbershop and those 5 people were left. So that information, unfortunately, is no longer available, but cell site information could have been quite useful in terms of that investigation. So it leads to us thinking like what could have possibly happened. So Kennedy's already alluded to it. But also we can also point to the history of abductions, as other speakers have alluded to. The history of abductions is quite rich from Zimbabwe from 1975 up until present day. And each group that abducts people in Zimbabwe has what we call signature of killings. If it's the CIO, if it's ZNA, if it's war veterans, if it's a multi-agency team in the context of what we call ferret. And I wish to point out that to some people who are not aware, that ferret is just a moniker. It could be several teams. So it goes by alphabet for Alpha, Bravo. So it could be Team Lima or Team Kilo that could have been responsible. So the ZRP have not corrected that myth around the use of the word ferret. So that's what I wanted to point out briefly. And I've written an article in detail explaining some of the investigation loopholes in regards Itai, and I've written around the intelligence structure. You can Google some of this stuff because I don't want to waste people's time, so you can look it up. So some of the issues that have just been discussed in terms of the history, the investigation, the locations. I've got an article in which I actually mapped a couple of locations which people are taken to. So that's quite important in a community safety and crime prevention strategy. So that's my comment really, and thank you for listening.
Well, thanks so much for that comment, Dr. Keith Selika there. Guys, this is brought to you by Amnesty International Zimbabwe in partnership with SITE. We're bringing you this space 10 years later without answers. Itai Dzamara. Then just go on to Leonard there. I see Leonard is a guest as well. Leonard, what's your question to our guest this evening?
Thank you, Brighton. My question is, what are other organizations doing in Zimbabwe? I mean, we've seen the abductions of a lot of people, including Itai Dzamara. 10 years now, Itai Dzamara is nowhere to be found. We've got Tondera Indira is nowhere to be found. A lot of political activists, these forced disappearances, abductions, and torturing of journalists are continuing. What can the parliament do in order to put an awareness to the society, or what are the small communities supposed to be doing in trying to combat this kind of forced disappearance and torturing? Right now, we've got Blessed Amsanga in prison. I mean, what are we supposed to be doing? Because I've seen that the organizations such as SADC or African Union are not doing enough. And we also have these international organizations like Amnesty International. We just hear them commenting or giving statements or whatever, but what action should be done by we Zimbabweans in order to protect such things not to happen again? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leonard, for that question this evening. Let me just throw that to Justina Mkoko there and also tune it with another question to say, Justina, what's been happening in terms of Justina Mkoko Foundation? What are you guys doing briefly to respond to Leonard? What are you doing as Justina Mkoko Foundation, and what can people do in terms of parliament, in terms of pushing for solidarity around the issue of abductions, tortures, as well as disappearances? Over to you, Justina.
Thank you very much for that question, Leonard, and also a question from you, Brighton. I think I will attempt to answer the second question first and say that the Justina Mkoko Foundation is mapping people who are affected by trauma and providing a platform for them to be able to tell their stories. And what I can say is that a lot of these people still need attention in terms of therapy, and we have also been able to refer them to service providers for them to be able to go through therapy. I think in terms of solidarity, I was happy to hear what Makomborero was saying. I think we were very rich in terms of solidarity a few years back. But I think with the issue of instilling fear and what people have seen happening to other people who have come out to be in solidarity with others, we find that more and more people are afraid to step out to be able to show solidarity to those who will be in distress, for fear that they might also probably fall into the trap of the state. So some of the actions in terms of solidarity from citizens have actually gone down over the years. And I think I also just agree to say that Parliament might have something that they can do. But I think in terms of the history of our parliament, we have not had them being that robust in terms of tackling issues that are related to abductions and enforced disappearances. So I think it's something that we need to work on as organizations, to advocate to parliamentarians more, to say that this is an issue of concern. What we have noted is that they will speak briefly about it and then it fizzles out. I remember when, the three ladies from the opposition who were abducted and tortured, when Honorable Joanna Mamombe went back to Parliament, she was actually booed in Parliament, rather than for people to really show solidarity, that one of our own. Because if you recognize a member of Parliament being treated like that, it just shows that there is a problem somewhere. And I would think that it would have been the parliamentarians who would have actually gone ahead to say, we don't want to be seeing this happening. But then when you then find someone being good in the same august house that is supposed to be protecting citizens, it leaves us surprised what exactly is supposed to be happening.
So thank you so much, ma'am, for that response this evening. Guys, I'm trying to wrap up the space this evening. I'm going to hand over the mic to Khanyo Farisa, the Amnesty International researcher there for Eastern South Africa, there to give us the closing remarks and a vote of thanks and also reflections to try to recap from what we spoke about from the beginning of the space, and also to say 10 years later, where are the answers? 10 years ago, that Itai Dzamara there. Over to you, Fari. I see Fari has left the space there. I can't see her. But Fari, if you are still on the space, please do request the mic so that we can get closing remarks from you guys from Amnesty there. And then we can also, hear from other speakers as well. Guys, please do request the mic. In the meantime, let's wait for Fari to come through this evening to also give us the closing remarks there. I see you, it is there. Maybe it is in briefly, what is your response to the issue of parliament? What can be done by parliament in Zimbabwe? What can be done by other organizations to also speak about solidarity, as Makombore spoke about earlier? I want to say we need to have solidarity. What can be done? It is on the issue of parliament, role of parliament, speaking out about issue of abductions, tortures, and disappearances in Zimbabwe. Over to you, Idris.
No, thank you very much, Brighton. First of all, it's to be very clear that when we're talking about abductions, enforced disappearances, we are talking about the commission of a crime. So whatever elements that we are going to define it around, we have to be particularly clear that this is a crime, and law enforcement agencies in Zimbabwe have a duty and responsibility to investigate the crime and also to bring perpetrators to justice. So I think that's for me is a very important aspect of this discussion. And what we have seen in Zimbabwe over time is that the crime has not been investigated. Perpetrators have been left scot-free. In that way, they have emboldened the perpetrators, they've emboldened the perpetration of this crime, and disempowered the victims. So whatever solidarity, whatever action we might have, we have to make it come to bear on the law enforcement agencies in Zimbabwe, first of all, so that we have the appetite, the responsibility, the duty to investigate and prosecute the commission of this crime. So I think our actions should really come to bear and put pressure on authorities in Zimbabwe to acknowledge and admit that a crime would have occurred when somebody is forcibly disappeared. And thereafter, law enforcement agencies have a duty to investigate the crime. The courts have a duty in the prosecution of that crime. So our solidarity efforts should really, we can speak all we want outside the country, but I think bottom line, it lies with the Zimbabwean institutions, the police, the prosecution authorities, the judiciary system to ensure that there is, some restitution. I'm glad for example, as sad as it is, the Justina Mukoka case where she, took the matter to court. And there was some restitution in a case where, even though perpetrators were not arrested and tried in court, at least, there was a holding to account of some authorities. And there were financial penalties to that, but at least there was that acknowledgement that a crime has been committed. There was an aberration of duty by some institutions and authorities, and consequences had to follow. So our solidarity network and effort has to put pressure on the institutions in Zimbabwe to ensure that this crime is seen as a crime, investigated as such, and prosecuted as such.
Thanks so much. It is a answer there for that. But also at Mositi Solea, so I know coming from Amnesty, please do request the mic. I want to hear from you in terms of wrapping up, closing remarks. I can't find Khanyo Farisa there from Amnesty, but Mositi Solea, please do request and accept the mic from your end there to give us the closing remarks this evening. Before I hand over to Mositi, as I wait for you to join in this evening, Makombore, in 1 minute, what are your closing remarks in line with what people spoke about earlier? We've heard Justina Mukoko speaking in there. You're listening to Kennedy Masia, you've heard from Idris there as well, and it from Khanyo Farisa there. What are your closing remarks, Makombore Razuvisha, in 1 minute? You can go ahead, Marco.
Can you
Yes,
hear
I
me?
can hear you. Can you go ahead, sir?
All right. I think what I can say is we've heard from various speakers, researchers, people like Jesnam Koko who have direct experience and also who work, also as professionals to try and research and find ways to put a stop at this. I think all the information on the problem, that articulates the problem, that identifies also what needs to be done are there. But what is lacking is the agency by us, the people, we the people. We lack the agency of Itai Dzamara to realize that here is a problem. We need to fight. Parliament cannot save us. Because like Jasnam Koko said, parliamentarians would laugh at fellow parliamentarians like Joanna who when abducted. Parliamentarians continued as normal when Honorable Takuzo Ngazuru was abducted. And there are many, like Jesnam Koko mentioned about James Chidakwa. Was it Jesna or maybe another speaker? Mentioned about James Chidakwa. He is an honorable member of parliament, former, they say. Abducted, nothing is free. So the history of abductions has always been there, and this machinery, the political machinery in Zimbabwe, makes things in such a way that no one can hold them accountable. Parliament cannot play an oversight role on the executive, because it's the executive that issues orders and does this thing. It's in such a way that the judiciary is another critical pillar of state. It's supposed to be autonomous, kind of independent, to be able to play oversight on both parliament and the executive, but it can't. It's disempowered. That's why when judges, they know that this is clearly a case whereby the state has overplayed its role and abused its power, but they can't make decisive judgments to enforce, to make sure that closure is brought or is established. So ultimately, these institutions, they constitutionally derive their power from we the people. It's we the people who vote the executive that has consolidated power, that has concentrated power in itself and disempowered all other aspects of our national institutions. And it's also we the people who voted for the constitution during the referendum, who voted for it overwhelmingly. And it is we the people who are being affected by these abductions and enforced disappearances. And as such, the solution is in we the people having the agency to say no. We need to say no. We know it will not be easy. It was never easy. It's never designed to be easy. But then it's rather better we, die on our feet than to live on our knees. Because either way, I want to give an interesting statistic. If you check the number of people who died of malaria this year alone, there are around 75 in 2024 to 2025. There are around 75. But how many have died because of protesting or demanding an end to abduction? It's fewer. If you check the number of people who died of cholera in 2008, there are over 4,000. But how many died because of, demanding a closure to human rights abuses? The number is far lesser. Fewer. Why am I bringing out these statistics? Is to show that if we don't stand up for ourselves, we will either die. So we have to choose our death, whether directly through, the state trying to shut our voices, or to just give in and then we'll die of, the consequences of an unchecked state, of a state that doesn't want to account to its citizens, a state that is fully fledged in habitual dereliction of its duties. So either way, people will die, whether we question the state or we don't, people will die. So I think the best thing is we need to question. There's no a substitution for that. And as I said, everything is there. People are doing very fantastic work. The lawyers, I think we heard what Kenneth Masia was saying. As a lawyer, he did over and above very well to pursue, to follow and exhaust all legal channels to get closure. He did very well, and he can't be a Superman or a Batman or maybe a Moses who bring his rod and open, the earth, part the earth to to Itai Dzamara's remains or so. He can't do that. He is a lawyer. He has done his job. Amnesty International, in terms of researches, in terms of also regional solidarity and global solidarity and advocacy, they're doing very well. And even the media are doing very well reporting on these cases. But the duty now, what needs to be done, the question of what is to be done is us citizens realizing that there's an elephant in the room with a problem, and that problem will not go away until it's resolved. It will not go away until someone goes further. And they have been resolved, actually, if people push further. I can tell, for example, Justina Mkoko, one way or another, she made a tremendous pay. Of course, justice, we can't say justice was achieved because, it wasn't, like for me, I don't think it's satisfactory, but to a certain extent, they were made to account. And there are many other cases. And had she not done that, they would not have accounted, there would not be closure, there wouldn't be progress to, in as far as making sure that if they know that they can be pushed to account, they will minimize whatever human rights abuses in missions they have. So if she had not done that and said, I'm just a victim, let me not do that, I can tell you there will be no progress right now. So I think she's a very good example of why we should always push to the limit, push to get what we want. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Makomborero Zwicha, for that closing remarks. Let me just go to Motsidiso Lewatse there to give us the closing remarks coming from Amnesty International Zimbabwe there. Good evening to you, ma'am. Welcome to the space.
Hi, Brighton. Thanks for having me. Sending in for Kanyo. She had some technical issues and was struggling to join. So I'll just close in for on her behalf. And would just like to highlight that as we've all been listening in from Justina Mukoko testimony from what happened to her, we've heard from Makomborero about the state targeting human rights defenders, everything that has been happening in the country. Idris also with his background from Human Rights Watch, and would like to appreciate that all these insights were brought in for everybody to just share what civil society has been doing in trying to force the government to conduct an investigation into Itai's disappearance. We, as Amnesty International, will continue working on this, use our 10 million members to continue to advocate for the investigation into Itai's disappearance. We also would like to urge the government to set up a judge-led commission into the disappearance of Itai subpoena witnesses and ensure that his findings are made public. That's what we've always been calling for this, and to ensure that there's justice and accountability for all victims of enforced disappearances. From in the past, I think I've been following conversations that there is a long history from like 1980s. There are other people also who have not been seen again, and we continue to think about them and also call for justice investigations into this. For as long as there is no justice and accountability for the enforced disappearances, especially where there is suspicion the state may have had a hand, then people will continue to be continuing with impunity, and there won't be any accountability for the actions of the perpetrators. We would like to also urge the country to ratify the UN Convention against torture and cruel and other human and degrading treatment of women, and also the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances. The government must take effective measures to address past human rights violations, including abductions and enforced disappearances by security agents, with the view of establishing the truth and ensuring access to justice for the victim, and bringing the suspected perpetrators to account, and providing effective remedies to the victims, including adequate compensation and medical treatment and other support. The families of those who have disappeared, they continue to move with a wound that might not heal, because every time they are reminded of their loved ones that are, their whereabouts are unknown. In closing, I would like to thank all the speakers, Makomborero Haru Zivishe. I would like to thank Justina Mukoko for sharing her testimony, of which I think she has shared many times before, but every time she does share, it's just as horrific, and not understanding why would such things, such horrific acts be, perpetrated by human beings. I would like to thank Idris Nasa from Human Rights Watch. We continue to work in collaboration with Human Rights Watch in calling for human rights reforms in Zimbabwe. I would like to thank also Kennedy Masia for his accounts of what happens, made us understand what actually he went through in supporting the family and representing them everywhere where he's been with them. And finally, I would like to thank STITE for hosting this event, allowing us to have these conversations and just unpack what actually happened to Itai Dzamara, what continues to happen to human rights activists, opposition political party members and activists, student leaders. It has been happening really. We have been monitoring since for a while as Amnesty International, 2023, 2019, 2024 also the same and torture happened. And of all of this, I don't think I can remember any of them where the state has actually taken, an active role in investigating, even where the perpetrators have been caught on camera. The state has not done any investigation into this to clearly show that, they are committed to upholding human rights and to ensuring that there is accountability for those that commit these crimes. Thank you very much, Brighton.
Thanks so much, Small Cities, there for that. Thanks so much, guys, for tuning in this evening from 5 o'clock up to now, speaking about Itai Dzamara, 10 years without answers. I hope you guys had an interesting discussion and learned something today from Justina Mokoko, from Makomborero, from Idris Hansa there, and from Kennedy Masia. It's quite interesting revelations there coming in from them, my guests for this evening. Anyway, this has been brought to you by Amnesty International in partnership with SITE. It's been a lovely discussion. Hope you guys enjoyed and learned something. Anyway, for myself, Brighton Ngube, good evening. Do enjoy the rest of your evening. It's bye for now.